I'm Nicole Davidson, and this is the Negotiation in Real Life podcast, the show where we take the lessons learned in real life negotiations to help you build your negotiation toolkit. We'll be hearing from lawyers, entrepreneurs, and senior business people about their best and worst negotiations. Negotiation is one of the most important skills for success in business and in life, but it's a skill we are rarely taught. For many of us, we develop our skills purely through trial and error. We see what works, discard what doesn't, and if we're lucky, we'll have a few good mentors along the way. In this podcast, we're going to give you access to an even greater range of negotiation mentors. Enjoy this episode, and please reach out if you have any questions. In this episode, I speak with Neil McKay, CEO of SME Finance Group. Neil has over 20 years commercial finance industry experience, including as a senior executive with one of the world's largest and most respected financiers, GE Capital. In more recent times, he has led a business that specialises in asset, property and business loans for small and medium businesses. Neil has extensive lending and risk management experience, having held credit discretions in excess of $15 million. Through his deep industry knowledge, Neil takes the approach of understanding the customer's business and matching the financial products available to provide balance sheet and cash flow solutions. Neil's extensive network of contacts across the banking and finance industry provides him with an up-to-date knowledge of the various products available, using not only the usual range of loan and deposit products, but also more specialised products such as trade finance, equipment finance, wholesale and dealer finance. In today's episode, Neil and I discuss the differences between negotiating on behalf of a large corporate compared with a small business. We discuss aspects of the negotiation that are included in Neil's planning process. We talk about tips to build your negotiation confidence and the use of role plays in negotiation preparation. We also discuss the importance of building in dispute resolution provisions in your negotiated agreements to avoid future disputes. And of course, there's much, much more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Neil McKay. So welcome to the show, Neil. It's lovely to have you here today.
Thank you, Nicole. Good to be here.
Great. Now, Neil, I know you've had a very extensive career in commercial finance, and you've had some fairly senior positions there, which no doubt have resulted in some interesting negotiations, as well as being a business owner. We're going to talk about some of your negotiations in a minute, but you might like to just give a brief overview of your background and who you are to our listeners.
Sure. No, thanks, Nicole. No, it's been over 20 years, 25 years probably in finance, commercial finance. Some of that time involved in smaller businesses like I am today, broking businesses as such, but also spent 15 years of my time with GE Capital, and GE at that time was one of the largest companies in the world. So completely different environment and dynamic, and had some very senior positions and enjoyed my time with GE. But yes, what I've learned out of that is both very big differences in SME and big corporate businesses, which we can talk about a little later.
And that might actually be quite a nice place to start, talking about differences in negotiations. Over time, have you had to change your negotiation style when you moved out of GE into smaller businesses?
Yes, most definitely. And part of the reason for that is when you're in a large corporate like a company like GE and all large corporates, the thing that you have there is availability of resources. So, you have your own internal legal departments and, HR and all of those sorts of things that you can, use as resources to help you, and generally you do have to do that. It's part of the corporate culture, and so you get involved in some fairly large negotiations, but have very talented resources around you. When you're in an SME business, it's completely different. Those resources are external. They come obviously at a cost. You have to find the right ones and engage with them. But the thing is that what you find is a lot of the time, and I know this happens in SME businesses, is that you look at the cost and you try and, I suppose, avoid that. So you can take some shortcuts and things like that and try and do everything yourself, and that can be a bit of a trap. So that's the thing that I've found to be completely different, and particularly early days when I came back into this particular role, and I was involved in a negotiation. You sort of look around and you go, okay, so where's my support here? Oh, it's me. so it's a little bit of that.
Yeah. Well, interesting though, because I think that's a really good point. And I love that you've looked at the positives of being in a large negotiation and having those supports. But one of the challenges, I guess, that presents is that you've got to take into account the interests of a lot more people, because it's not just you. How has that impacted your negotiations?
Yes, well, I mean, one of the great things in working for a large corporate and being in those situations is really understanding, compliance and all of those things, and understanding, legalities of situations, and you have to be. You're right. You always have to be very careful in negotiations, but probably even more so when you're in the large corporate, because it is very easy to be led outside of what is compliant and things like that in negotiations, and people you're negotiating with will also look at you and go, well, that organization's got very deep pockets, so and lots of resourcing available, so they will challenge you a lot. And so I think we're always constrained by compliance. I always see compliance as a good thing though, but very much in the larger organization, you have to very much be very compliant, and otherwise there are people there that are waiting for you to kind of step across that line.
Now, you've obviously had to do lots of different types of negotiations throughout your career. Have you had any formal training in the negotiation space?
Yes, once again, in my time at GE, yes, there was training available, so they do that, and they do that very well. And I mean, it's like the major banks and things like that. They have very good training grounds, particularly for this sort of thing. And so they do make that training available and resources available. And you certainly need it, because in one of my roles at GE, I was involved in negotiating partnership agreements and so forth with very, very large corporates. And so, you need to be on your game, and you need to really have the best possible negotiating skills, because you're always being challenged as such, and it's very important to be on your game, as I say.
So when you look back at that training, is there anything that stands out for you that has been a lesson that was a game changer for you?
Yes, I think it's really that what are the negotiables and what are the non-negotiables. So you really go into situations and plan well before as to what you're prepared to negotiate, and what you can't, what you absolutely want. And look, I think the other thing with that, you need to understand that yourself, but you also need to try and get an understanding of what's important to the other party as well. And where do you think that their negotiables and non-negotiables are? And that's probably the thing I learned the most. And if you prepare well when you get into that negotiation, then you're less likely to make a decision, I suppose, that you'll regret somewhere down the track.
Yeah, absolutely. The negotiations often decided before you get to the table.
Sure. For sure.
So when you think about some of the more challenging negotiations, or some of the negotiations that perhaps have had the biggest impact on you and built your development of skills, can you tell me about one of those negotiations, and what happened? What did you take away from it?
Yes, for sure. Probably once again, going back to my days with the large corporate, I was put into a role in a business that had some challenges, but had some very major clients, and one of those was one of the major retailers, and I was thrust into the role right at the time that there was significant negotiation going on, and I walked into that, and I suppose the thing for me was it was daunting a little with the caliber of the people that were in that negotiation. So you were talking about the CFO and so forth of that organisation, and that can be quite daunting. But at the end of the day, I knew I had a job to do, and I knew, as I said before, I knew what we had to come out of the arrangement with. And so
Mhm.
I sort of took a deep breath and over a fairly extensive period of time, I suppose stuck to what was important to us and made sure that they understood that was a non-negotiable, and and I think at the start they thought they were going to work their way around that, and we would move on it, certain terms and conditions, of course. And at the end of the day, I think that preparation and I suppose just having the confidence to negotiate with those sort of people helped a lot.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, we went from a position where I think most of the people around our organisation thought that we wouldn't sign a new contract with this organisation, and we did, and it continued on to a successful relationship. But and look, you always have to give some ground, but they were on the terms that we always wanted it to be on, so that ended up being a good result.
Great. And you talked there about the importance of preparation and confidence. In terms of preparation, what does it look like for you going into a negotiation like that, where you've got very significant people? What does preparation encompass?
First of all, understanding who the players are and on the other side, and do some homework around that as to who you're negotiating with. Understand if it is an existing relationship that you're looking to renew, which it was in this case. Go back and look at the history and talk to some of the people that have been involved in that, and what's worked and what hasn't. Try to understand where you think the sticking points in the arrangement are going to be, or what the challenges are going to be. And then I think just being, when you get to the negotiation, being upfront, not only stating yourself what's important, I suppose, but also asking the other side what's important to them.
Yeah.
What are the key, and I do this in most situations, asking people, what's important to you, and you'll find out pretty quickly where they're going to be satisfied if they get to a certain arrangement, and where they're prepared to actually negotiate on terms and so forth.
Yeah, great. And you talked also about the confidence piece. Any tips for listeners who perhaps are struggling with their confidence going into a negotiation?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nicole. It's something that I don't find challenging, but I know a lot of people do, and so I think sometimes it can be even just talking to other colleagues around you, and even running your case by them and just working with them to get a feel for, do they think that it's a good case, or is it, should you make any changes, all of that sort of thing. Sometimes even to a degree, role playing can come into account if you haven't got that confidence. We used to be big in that organisation around role play and things like that, and that can certainly help. Sometimes it seems that, I know role play can sometimes be a little difficult because you think, oh, this isn't the real situation, and it's hard. You feel like an actor in some ways, but it can be good. It can really help to prepare you well.
I agree, and it's interesting. All of my courses that I run are very experiential, and so we always have people role playing, and people you'd sort of use that role play word and they'd be like, oh, but then the feedback is often that the role play was the best part of the program in terms of having a learning experience. So I think it's absolutely critical, and I think it doesn't happen enough in business.
No, for sure, I'd agree with you, because it is easy to resist, and I've even done that when I've had to do significant presentations or whatever, and you're kind of forced into this role play, and I've been the sort of person that's like, I just want to stand up there and do it, but you find that the role play really does help you.
Absolutely. And it's all part, I think what's really interesting about what you've just said is the confidence links right back into having done the preparation. The more prepared you are, the more confident that you can be going in there, because you've got everything behind you.
Yes, very much so.
So I know that particularly in the GE sense, it seems like a lot of your negotiations were those sort of forward-looking, doing deals rather than negotiating when things have gone wrong. Have you had experience of those sort of dispute type negotiations as to the front end, and what difference does that make for you?
In recent times, yes, I have in two instances. Yes, and that's a completely different scenario. So in both of these instances, they were about, one was a joint venture or a partnership agreement. The other was also a partnership agreement, but a referral type situation. In both cases, I suppose I learned a lot from those. The overall with both was that arrangements were set up and documented with all the right intentions and so forth. But once we were and started to get into those arrangements, things went off track, and to the point that then both parties become frustrated with each other, and at the end of the day, things end up in dispute, and in both of these cases they did. And look, I think the thing that I've learnt from that is, and as I said before, you're challenged in a small business because having the availability of the resources to help you, they are there, but you do have to go and seek them out, and you have to pay for them. And so when you've got a board of directors or whatever, they need to be engaged as well and say, yes, we'll support you with the cost associated with that. But sometimes you do try and cut corners. And probably in both instances, what I've seen is a document, an agreement that was put in place and negotiated with all the good intentions, but essentially then put in the drawer. People forget about the content of it and go off and do things that are completely different to what's in the agreement. And in both cases, they've ended up in fairly significant disputes for a small business anyway.
So would it have made a difference, or do you recommend coming out of those experiences that when you've got a contract in place for a partnership or a joint venture or something like that, that you're actually regularly going back to the agreement? Or is it a case that agreement needs to change anyway?
It's a little bit of both. So what I would say, my learning from both is, I think when you talk about negotiation, I think negotiation or having a negotiator involved is a good thing at the outset. So because you're better off to sit around a table at the outset and say, and have somebody who professional there to help you to really get the right things in place and really put into that document what people intend to do, not what just looks good from a legal point of view, but what they intend to do. So my learning there is that would be a good starting point. And if I was to go into another one, that's exactly what we would do. But to your point, yes, most definitely, I think the document does need to be live as such. It needs to be real. It needs to be looked at regularly, particularly when you're making big decisions that impact the business. And look, everything is fluid. You can change these things, and you can get into these arrangements and find, we thought this was going to happen and document it that way, but it's actually not like that. And so amendments can be made. But I am a big believer that you do document everything, and you just, because that's essentially when you get into any challenging situations, that's what you end up going back to. And certainly in the case of both where we've had legal, and it's got to a legal situation, everybody refers back to the document. That's what happens. It doesn't matter what you said, what you thought. Exactly. Everyone refers back to the document. So in summary, negotiate at the start and do it properly with a professional person, and then have a live living document that you refer to regularly.
With these examples that you're thinking of, did either of the contracts have dispute resolution provisions in them? Like, does it say if there's a dispute around this is the process that we'll use to resolve it? Or were you left with going to the lawyers really as the only option?
The first one certainly didn't. The second one did, but it was a little vague in its content. And look, when I suppose the first party read that and said, we're just going to go to our lawyers anyway. It's a little vague. It's a little grey here and there or whatnot. So we're going to go to lawyers. So there was an attempt to have those conditions or those things in place, but it didn't really play out that way. And I suppose when you're in that situation, if you haven't got confidence in the dispute resolution, then you're clearly going to go and take legal advice.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. And a lot of the work that I do is where people are, they have a contractual process where they have to go to mediation before they can go to proceedings. So the lawyers are involved, but they don't go straight to litigation. And the intention behind that is to resolve it at mediation without all of those costs of litigation. So, it's certainly a process we see a little bit, but probably not as much as it could be happening, I guess.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Nicole, because essentially with the court system today, that's where you end up anyway, because, they try and in both cases, this is where these situations have ended. They drive you to mediation anyway, but within the court system, which clearly comes at a huge cost.
I was going to say, how much have you spent by the time you get to that mediation?
Huge cost. And so yes, why don't you bring that forward and have it well documented, and then use a negotiator or a mediation process prior to getting to that point. It's a lot less expensive, let's put it that way.
Absolutely. And then one of the things with litigation is obviously parties start to dislike each other more than they did when the dispute arose.
For sure.
Was there any chance in either of these that if the dispute had been resolved or addressed sooner, that the relationship could have been saved, do you think?
Yes, in both cases, absolutely. And particularly the second one, which could have been a very viable business line as such, and just didn't turn out that way. But certainly it could have been resolved within the parties. And I suppose I was an advocate for that. Let's get around a boardroom table and sort through this as such. But you made a very good point there. People change their attitude, demeanour and so forth in these situations. And so they become angry, and you said this, you did that, and all of that starts at the outset. And it just takes then one party to head off to their lawyers or solicitors, and next thing you've got, action underway. And I remember that with the second one, it just came as a huge surprise. It involved the compensation or the outcome wasn't a massive amount of money, but originally this matter had been set for a hearing in the Supreme Court, and it was subsequently downgraded to county court, but it was still looking like 3 days in the county court. And you look at that and you go, how did we ever end up here? Yeah. So I think that's the answer to your question. You sit there and go, no, this could have been resolved, and people could have sat around a table, once again, with a professional person helping them. Not at the point we are, but once you do get to a point where all of a sudden everybody's angry with each other, and there's no stopping it. No stopping it.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, hopefully you won't have to deal with more of those sort of examples going forward, but never mind. I'm here if you need me.
Absolutely. But you do learn from them. And I think that's a critical thing, or a key thing, that you do learn out of these things. And I must say the mediator in the last one, who was obviously provided by the court as such, was very, very good, because at the start of the mediation, he outlaid, there's no winner in this situation. Even if you win, you don't, because you're paying so much money. And I thought that was some of the best advice I'd actually heard for a long time, and wished we'd been told that somewhere earlier down in the whole process.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because presumably your lawyers didn't tell you that.
No, not at all. And I don't want to. I mean, lawyers are fantastic, and got a lot of friends who are lawyers and all that sort of thing, and they do a great job. But and I mean, look, they're just doing their job, and I think you do also get yourself to the point where you go, no, there's no other way but getting legal, getting lawyers on board with this or whatever. And it was quite surprising, because we got to this mediation, and the mediator spent like 15 minutes just going through, 20 minutes just talking about this, citing various cases and whatnot, and just said, guys, there are no winners here. You need to work this out. There's no winners. Great advice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, I think, I also like lawyers a lot. And I think the issue with litigators is that in the eyes of the law, someone is always right and someone is always wrong. And that's what the legal process is about. It's about attributing blame and responsibility. Whereas in business disputes, I think often it's not about blame. There are things that just happen, and you can resolve it and get to an outcome that works for everybody without actually having to point the finger at somebody.
For sure.
And look, some lawyers are very good. Some litigators will do everything they can to keep their clients out of court. Others actually really enjoy the cut and thrust of court, and that's why they became litigators, I think. So their motivations, although they may be subconscious, are more geared towards litigation, which is of course very adversarial.
No, that's absolutely right, Nicole. And what I do remember one of the critical or key lines that this mediator said in the process was, and guess what, guys? Sometimes the courts get it wrong, and gave us a couple of examples of that as well, and said, so if you want to throw yourself at the mercy of the court, they might get it right, they might get it wrong.
Yeah.
I found that very enlightening and makes you stop and think.
Absolutely. I think that's a line I've used once or twice myself.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Neil, I've really appreciated talking to you about your experiences.
No, it's been a pleasure.
If people wanted to reach out with you, what might they do to get in touch and have a chat with you?
Oh, no problems, and people can. I'm happy at any time to do that. So from my mobile number 0407 790 566, or email is nmckay, M-C-K-A-Y, at smefg, F for Freddie, G for George.com.au. Either of those you'll get me, and I'm happy to take any questions or queries.
Fantastic. And I'll put those details in the show notes for people so that they're on the podcast
Terrific.
as well.
That would be great.
Thank you very much for your time again, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Nicole. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. If you've taken away some great tips from this episode, I'd love to hear about it, so please connect with me via my website or LinkedIn. If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to learn more tips to improve your negotiations, head to our website, nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au, where you can follow my blog, watch presentations, and download resource sheets. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you get every episode as it comes out. If you have an interesting negotiation story that you'd like to share with my audience, head to the website and complete a guest application. Until the next episode, happy negotiating.